Welcome back. Again, I'm here with Mark Cowart, and we're going to talk a little bit about West Bay. Now, we were very fortunate last Sunday to be able to get out, together and fish West Bay, and let's just talk about how we started out.
Okay, well, the Sunday before, Michael and I had gone out. My son Michael and I had gone out, and we caught 13 redfish that day. Very shallow water, dark bottom on the north end of West Bay.
Right.
And, we kept wanting to go out. Bill called me Sunday morning and said it's going to be identical to what happened last week. The only difference was there was not as much water and the wind was blowing out of the north versus the south.
Yeah.
So we head up to where Michael and I had caught some fish. No water, none at all. We worked around, found a few redfish, actually scattered a bunch of redfish early.
They were really spooky.
Yeah, it was something, but there were a lot of redfish. There were a lot of redfish moving around. Yeah. So anyway, I catch one, Bill catches one. We talk about it. We're trying to get back where we know the fish are. We can't get in there. We work our way out, and we make a decision. And I said to Bill several times, I said, maybe we need to go to the other side of the bay where the wind's blowing the water up. I know one spot that I hadn't fished all winter that's got a dark bottom. And I sure am glad we went back there.
Yeah, you were right. Where we were, and it's just anywhere outside of Burnt Mill Creek over there in those areas. The water's a little bit warmer, and you had done it. You and Michael had caught all those fish. And we were casting, to where those fish were.
Right.
They just weren't feeding at the
No.
time. They're up there sunning, and like I said, we catch a couple of little rats.
Yeah.
And Mark, we were in Mark's boat, and of course, and Mark made the call. So we run across the bay looking for dark bottom, looking for marsh. It's going to warm up quicker, and we were in a familiar place that we fished a lot. But like I said, I hadn't fished at all.
I hadn't fished since last fall.
Little bit out of the wind over there when we got there, and see absolutely no movement at all.
Yeah, water's crystal clear. We're in a foot and a half of water, and
now it's about 3:15,
3:30, and we know we got an hour and a half to fish.
Yeah. So we start a drift. Mark sets up a nice little drift where we can reach, into the edges of those marshes and little creeks that go back. And I guess we were coming up where two or three of them, converge together.
Right, there's three.
And, Mark's fishing a little more on the outside. I'm throwing a little bit more on the inside. I throw across one of those points, which obviously if you can find a point with moving water, we're just prospecting. I throw across that point, make a long cast, bounce a shrimp a couple times, a gulp shrimp, which I'll show you in a minute. And Mark's going to talk about what he was using, what we used to catch these fish. I bounce this thing 2 or 3 times, and I get lit up. And then the world comes apart.
It was one of those moments where, it's like walking along and seeing a $100 bill laying on the ground. You start looking for more. Well, I look up. Bill's fighting this fish, and I look up, and it looks like there's about 4 or 5 torpedoes heading at the boat. And I'm not kidding. I'm talking about they were waked up, and they were coming out. They weren't running out. They're just cruising. And so Bill, there were a lot of oyster shells, a lot of shells on the bottom. Bill gets broke off.
Yeah, get cut off.
He grabs another rod. I go to throw. I get a tangle. I get untangled. He throws. I throw. We both hook up. And it was that way for the next hour and a half.
There is an inadvertent tip right there. When we go, I've got 3 or 4 rods.
Absolutely.
Mark's got 3 or 4 rods rigged. I got cut off on an oyster shell.
Yep.
Those fish were moving everywhere. All I had to do was reach over and grab another rod and throw back out, and I hooked up again. Now, Mark, once he got his fish settled, and we got those fish settled, when he hits power poles and, puts us in place. And Mark's got 2, so, if it's windy, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
we're in place. We get settled on those fish. I re-rig the other one, and, this is an important part about it, is how we work those fish, or how we let those fish work us. You know, instead of, you know, Mark jumping on the trolling motor and chasing those fish around and trying to hunt them down, which I've said 1,000 times does not work.
Ever.
We sat there, kind of surveyed it. Everything went back to slick calm.
It did.
And then all of a sudden, in the back of now the creek in the middle more, here comes all these ripples, you know, all these waves. Now, we never saw a fin. We never saw a tail. All we see is just, you know, a 10-yard square of water moving, maybe, or bigger. So Mark gets out ahead of them early, gets a bait on the bottom that we're going to talk about in a minute. I get out on the other side, get ahead of them early. Boom, we both get lit up again.
Absolutely.
But now, what was the cool thing about the fish? Instead of scattering,
yeah, they turned around, went right back where they were, and you know, to them, those fish were feeding, and
That's
it
right.
wasn't, you know, we're not running around in the boat, we're not making any noise, we're fighting the fish back to the boat. And the good thing was, these fish, when they would hook, they would leave the school, and ironically, one or two fish would follow that hooked fish, but it wasn't like we had to throw on top of each other, because as long as you were out in front of that, when the school is moving, as long as you will get in front of the school, let the fish come to the bait. Don't bring the bait to them, because there's nothing natural going to come to that school of redfish.
Very true. That's very true. And, you know, whether it's dumb luck or experience, there's no other place we could cast, you know, unless you threw right in the middle of them, which is never profitable.
No.
So we're getting out in front of them, and we start noticing that, and we're all seeing is ripples, is they're moving from one little, let's call it pond or creek. A few of them move into the other one. But none of them, folks, are coming out into the open water that we're fishing in. So, you know, very important here is, you know, we're getting a bait out early when they start to move, and we're not sitting there when they're not moving. We're not just hammering, putting baits in the water and you know, with the potential to spook these fish. You know, if you're in a school of redfish and they're feeding and they're working, the worst thing you can do, the two worst things, is try to chase them.
Right. Don't
let
do
them
that.
work. If they're, you know, let them come back and forth, because that's their pattern lots of times. And the other is just don't hammer the water with baits.
Right. There's three keys to this. Is that when you run into a situation like we ran into, we've done it before, but never in this quality of fish, in this quantity of fish. The first time you get a chance to position the boat, you better get it right.
Yeah.
Because the moment that you go to moving around, you're spooking the fish.
That's very true.
And we were fortunate enough that we were able to hit the right spot the first time.
Yeah, oh, buddy, were we. All right, we're going to come back and talk about, you know, what we use to catch those fish, and we'll go from there. Let's take this quick break. Hey, welcome back. Let's quickly go into taking care of some business here, and let's talk about tides today. The high tide is going to be at 3:41 p.m. this afternoon. Still don't have the water's not moving great, but it's starting to move a little bit better after we come off this moon. Low tide at 1:50 this morning, so it's kind of flipped around a little bit. We're looking at the peak fishing times brought to us by Mark Coward at Edgewater Realty, and today it's 5:45 this morning to 7:45 this morning, and then this evening 6:15 to 9:15. Now, Mark, let's talk about before we run. Oh, let's get to the. I got to do some business here. Look, folks, you got to send some stuff in, because these people are really happy that you hadn't. Winston starts over every year, and there's not too many in here, so we'll get Mark to draw for the red snapper.
Okay.
Okay. This is red snapper. Pick one out. Bill Allen.
Candy Cassell.
Candy
Lynn
Cassell
Haven.
from Lynn Haven. Okay, that's your red snapper. And then the $20 gift certificate from Tarpon Dock Seafood, folks.
Renita White, Defuniak Springs.
All right, Defuniak Springs and Lynn Haven. That's what we were just talking about. Wide viewing area.
That's
here.
exactly
So,
right.
Congratulations on that. Now, real quick, because, you know, again, we could talk, you know, forever doing this, but let's talk about what you were using and how you were using it. Because right behind me here is Jim Wynn, a good friend of mine, better known as Jim Dooley, that we all grew up with on the radio. He's always talking about, you guys are talking about what you use. But, you know, I'm using the same thing and maybe not catching her. So he said, go into a little more detail. So,
Okay.
Jim, if you're over there on the radio this morning, this is for you, buddy.
All right, well, let me tell you that the first key to this time of year, I do believe, is a scented bait. We use Procure. Both Bill and I are big advocates of that. Like Michael says, you're not using Procure, you're not fishing. I use Z-Man products, which most of the Z-Mans have the Procure scent embedded in it. And then they slime it with it in the package, which my hands smell like that right now. There's 3 baits here. One of them is this Z-Man shrimp. As you'll see, this shrimp, very lifelike. Pinfish aren't going to pull it apart. You can pull this thing and nothing's going to happen to it. The great thing about this bait, you can rig it with a weighted swim bait hook, which is perfect for this. But the way this is designed, there's a channel that runs in the tail. Bill has always rigged his shrimp gulp backwards, which is because that's how these fish move. I mean, it's how these things swim. This is rigged perfect. It throws well, medium to medium light setup, perfect for this. That right there you can throw, and when you hop it, it looks natural coming off the bottom. They love this. This is a great bait. The second bait is a Z-Man jerk shad. Now, if you'll notice, there's a pattern here in these colors because these fish are feeding primarily on mudworms, which absolutely shocked me. The other day, they were in the bottom of the boat.
They were spitting up. They had eaten so many of them and digging them out of. And this is important. We're fishing low and slow.
Absolutely.
And kicking up a little bit of that mud when you're fishing these baits down. And, you know, I start looking in the bottom of the boat, and they're so full, they're you know, putting out these sandworms that they've been eating on.
Yeah,
you know,
it was really
released
shocking.
all of these fish.
So I rigged this the exact same way. Is that I rigged the Z-Man shrimp, the Z-Man jerk shad. Is the great thing about this thing is that it again is tough. It isn't going to tear. You can catch multiple fish on it. I'm rigging it and throwing it out just like I'm hopping a worm on the bottom bass fishing. Now, another thing that you can do, you can take a finesse worm and rig it with a weighted jig lead head, like a jig head, rig it weedless, and hop this along the bottom. Or you could rig it like with a swim bait hook, and do the same thing. Something that is very important here, these fish are very strong. You want to use a superline hook, a hook designed for superline, because you're going to bend these hooks out on these fish if you got the wrong hook. So just don't use your standard necessarily bass hook for doing this. It'll work. If you fight the fish, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if you're going to muscle him in, it's going to be difficult.